And Connor O'Gara gets to come on as our maybe Connor O'Gara can do a little song and dance along with Not Throwing Away My Shot. Connor, of course, from Saturday Down South. Connor, you got a song or a dance for us?
I don't, and quite frankly, the fact that you even asked just says that you don't know me as well as I thought you knew me, so that worries me at this point.
So you don't dance and you don't sing, and all I knew is you talk football, so I learned something 2 years later after starting to have you on here. Arkansas, Tennessee, man. Did this say more about Arkansas or did this say more about Tennessee when you watched that game?
That's a good question. I don't like to fall into the camp of, like, did one team lose it or did one team win it? I tend to think that this said more about where Arkansas is at, probably, just because what I questioned with this team earlier in the year was how it was going to be able to hold up from a depth standpoint, right? We talked about whether or not Arkansas, when it got to this point a little bit later in the year in ICC play, if they're going to be able to have the numbers to compete in the trenches with some of these better teams, or at least teams that have what you would consider to be better depth. Cole Kubelik said on the broadcast, look, Arkansas doesn't even have 9 defensive linemen that Barry Odom feels like he can actually play in this game. Yet did it matter by game's end? No. To me, that just shows you that maybe this potential lack of depth down the stretch isn't necessarily going to hurt Arkansas in the way that we thought it could. And the fact that they were able to show up like that, after the A&M loss, kind of get humbled a little bit, and they just continue to bounce back. And this thing isn't fading away, and it's not just some cute little story that was going to play out early in the year. To me, it said a lot about Arkansas. Now, it said a lot about Tennessee as well and kind of where they're at in year 3 with Jeremy Pruitt. But to me, this just continues my growing belief that Sam Pittman is the SEC Coach of the Year, and, he's definitely going to be in the conversation to be the National Coach of the Year.
Does it take a 500 record at least for Arkansas for Sam to be Coach of the Year? Because I kind of wonder about that. For a program that had lost, I love that I have forgotten how long the SEC losing streak was because it was stuck in our brain for so long. But for that losing streak to now lead to what's happened over the first 6 games, he's done an obviously great job. But, I mean, can you vote for a guy for Coach of the Year if they're 4-6? Or does 5-5 make that much of a difference?
Yeah, I think you can. I definitely think you can. I would have voted for him with just 3 wins. That was what I said coming into the year. If Dan Pittman gets the 3 wins, he's my SEC Coach of the Year, and he's already there, and he should be at 4. So I absolutely think you can, given what we thought about expectations. And let's be honest, SEC Coach of the Year, any sort of Coach of the Year award is always to the coach who surpassed expectations the most. I mean, and that's what we're talking about with Sam Pittman here, because when that schedule came out, man, we came on this show and we talked about, hey, can Arkansas get to 1 win this year? Do you think it could happen? Do you think they can go 1-9? And we're talking about these possibilities. And even then, it kind of seemed like, well, they're going to have something to really bounce their way. It doesn't feel like that anymore. And it feels like Arkansas is on this level where it can actually compete. And I'd love to go back and see what Arkansas would do against Georgia if Sam Pittman actually had some film on Stetson Bennett, because I think that would be a much more interesting matchup. And, I find myself growing more and more into this belief that Arkansas is getting to the point now where the SEC really has to take it seriously. This Florida team that's feeling really good about itself after the Georgia win, it needs to take Arkansas seriously because that defense can hang. And I think that Sam Pittman right now is anything he does from this point on is gravy. He is absolutely the SEC Coach of the Year, in my opinion, and I don't think he has to get to 5-5 to show that.
One of the things I think stood out from this game against Tennessee, and I felt the same way, when I was picking Florida, Georgia, and I'm not sure if I feel the same way about Arkansas, Florida coming up this weekend. If you have somebody that just seems to be head and shoulders better than the other team's quarterback, you're usually going to win. And I think Felipe Franks is head and shoulders better than Jared Garantano. I am so floored at how Tennessee has been completely unable to develop a quarterback in these last 4 years. But that's the biggest, that to me meant a lot in that matchup. You trust Felipe Franks to do some things. You saw that from him in the third quarter especially, and Tennessee just wasn't going to allow Garantano to win the game for them or lose the game for them. I felt the same way from Georgia, Florida.
It was ugly. I mean, I thought that when he went out with the concussion, we didn't really know if it was because of play or it was because of an injury, because he jogged off on the field, on his own power, and we weren't led to believe that it was, something like a benching. But at the same time, it was at least worth questioning at that point because we've seen him get benched numerous times throughout his career. The weird thing with Garantano, and that's the pronunciation that we were told to switch to last year, but I don't really know if everybody is willing to make that change because, quite frankly, we get so used to saying one thing or another, and I'm not saying that you're wrong or anything. You can go either way on that, but I think that what we've seen from him has just been disappointment, and the continued belief that Jeremy Pruitt has in him frustrates Tennessee fans who, were wanting to see Harrison Bailey and not necessarily just in a 24-13, game where he's asked to do all the heavy lifting down the stretch. It was just weird, and you're reminded that, there are certain teams that look like they have their quarterback situation figured out, and even at this point of the year, there are a lot of teams that really don't, and Tennessee is certainly one of them right now.
Speaking of Connor O'Gara here on Halftime, Connor, the new AP and coaches polls just came out a couple hours ago, and you've got a kind of like a little flip-flop happening right now with the 5 and 6. It's the same teams, but you got Florida at 5 and A&M at 6 in the coaches poll, and opposite in the AP poll. I'm just curious from your standpoint, if one of those two teams could squeak into the college football playoff, who would you put your stock into, Florida or Texas A&M?
Well, the good news is that, I think that we're not going to have a debate like that at the end of the regular season because Florida, if it wins the SEC championship, is going to get into the playoffs. If Florida loses to presumably Alabama, then that wouldn't necessarily be the case. That's the good news. But yeah, as of right now, I would give it to A&M. A&M beat Florida. They both have one loss, and A&M beat Florida. So that to me suggests that A&M should be ahead of the Gators. Now, the path to get there, Florida's got a better path, just in part because of what happened over the weekend with Clemson and Notre Dame, where, we're talking about, the ACC getting a 2-team bid in. That was the exact scenario that needed to unfold, was Clemson playing really good offensively, but Notre Dame ultimately coming out with a win, because now if Clemson avenges that loss in the ACC championship with Trevor Lawrence, and that's Notre Dame's only loss, it's like, well, how are you going to leave Notre Dame out when it only has that one loss, whereas, A&M would be sitting there with 9-1 and a 28-point loss to Alabama. So I guess to answer your question, I would say that Florida has a more clear path just because it's a favorable regular season draw, but obviously they would need to beat Alabama in the SEC championship in order to even have a chance. But I guess, Florida's a little bit more cut and dry than A&M at this point.
One of your colleagues over at Saturday Down South, Neil Blackman, just posted an article on Saturday Down South. It says if the Gators lose again this season, it'll be Saturday against Arkansas. And I think the way that the way that Florida played against Georgia Saturday was just borderline impressive. They were just moving the ball up and down the field and getting whatever they wanted against Georgia. But now with the news that Kyle Pitts, their star tight end, is questionable for this game, do you see Arkansas hanging in there with Florida and maybe possibly pulling an upset, or is Florida too much to handle for Arkansas?
Yeah, I think that I think that right now you look at this offense and it's a juggernaut. It really is. But at the same time, what happened in the second half of that game against Georgia? Florida's offense was not as sharp, and when you have somebody like Kyle Pitts who's all of a sudden taken out of your lineup, it changes the way that defenses are going to cover you. And we actually saw that down the stretch against A&M, too. If you go back to that game, Florida really wasn't dominant down the stretch offensively when Pitts went down with an injury. It definitely changes what Florida is capable of doing. And it does favor a team like Arkansas, who you've seen, they've just become so prepared for every single offense that they've faced. Now, I think Florida still has a lot of weapons, and Kadarius Toney and Trayvon Grimes are more than capable of taking over a game if unaccounted for, but it definitely makes it more interesting. And I was looking at that spread thinking, the 17 points, whatever that was, I think Arkansas can absolutely stay within that with or without Kyle Pitts. Now, it's going to be difficult. There's no doubt about it. Florida offensively, you're not going to shut down for 60 minutes, but this is a team right now that if they do have to kind of pick up on the fly and figure out what their offensive identity is without Kyle Pitts, it definitely makes things more interesting for Arkansas.
Connor, I can't let you leave without giving you a moment to gloat about Indiana football. Connor is a graduate of Indiana University. They've done something this year they've never done before. beat Michigan and Penn State in the same year. This Michael Penix is really fun to watch, but have at it, man. I went to Indiana a couple years. I know what the football history is like there, so this is something else, isn't it?
Hey, I used to always say to people, when I came down to start writing about SEC football, it was different for me because I didn't have a football program when I went to college. I went through basketball school. They didn't play football there, and now to be able to see Indiana in the top 10 nationally with Tom Allen, who's just done some tremendous, tremendous things for that program, it's unbelievable. I mean, I didn't think that I would see this necessarily in my lifetime, but it is absolutely exciting, and to see the way that they're not, coughing things up late. That's what the Indiana football that I grew up it was very, very used to. So, I mean, to see them getting off to this type of start and beat a team like Michigan, and not just beat them, but beat them like a drum. I mean, it's an incredible thing. And as we've seen, with Arkansas, sometimes those underdog stories, they're fun and they're worth national attention. They're worth everybody's attention at this point.
Well, it is fun to watch, that's for sure. I haven't seen excitement over Indiana football since I was a freshman there. That's the last time they'd ever been ranked. Connor, appreciate your time, man. Always fun talking with you. Enjoy the games this weekend, and we'll look forward to another chat Monday.
Thanks, Connor.
Sounds good. Appreciate it, guys.
You got it. Connor O'Gara, Saturday Down South, covering everything around the SEC and celebrating the Hoosiers at the same time.